The goal is to make it so Donald Trump is toxic. It is, to me, it felt like a reboot that wasn't particularly successful, like a sequel that is nowhere near as good as the first one. Democrats really don't have any ideas. They're just anti-Trump by and large in the grand scheme of things. That was Biden's entire campaign, effectively, was I'm not Trump. And it seems like they're desperately trying to keep Trump from running in 2024.
The Democrats want us to spend the whole day today on defense. This was the plan. They had the January 6th prime time whatever hearing last night. There's supposed to be 6 nights of this, I think, or 6 sessions of this, something like that. They're going to do multiple days. Clay, we talked yesterday about how much of it, and we're not diving into that, folks. There's something more important going on, but I just want to know, how much of it did you watch? How much could you stomach?
20 minutes. I basically said, hey, I'm going to watch this as if I am a totally normal person, not us, by which I mean you're usually paying attention to a great degree to every single detail going on. And I said, if the first 20 minutes, which is more than most people who are casually interested in politics are going to watch, if the first 20 minutes gives me any new information, provides any sort of gripping content where I would say, okay, this feels compelling to me, I'll stay on. And 20 minutes in, we made the switch from, I think, Benny Thomas or whatever that guy's name is, Thompson, to Liz Cheney. And I thought both of them were pretty boring. And they were reciting essentially facts that had already been written about, some of them months ago in the newspapers. And obviously, you and I stay attuned to every little detail there. So I wasn't learning anything new. I turned it off and I went and started reading the book that you suggested to me, the endurance book about the Shackleton Antarctica expedition, which, by the way, read the first 100 pages or so of that, riveting, and I turned off the television. So that was my evening of activity in the Travis household.
Yes, well done, sir. I'm still making my way through Undaunted Courage, which is also fantastic. But see, here's the thing, Clay and I watched. Believe it or not, I got up and watched the whole thing on playback. 2 hours of
this morning before you came in. You watched the whole thing.
Just being lectured by Liz Cheney, and there was nothing new. The biggest omission from, you know what, actually? Let's get to this later, because here's what actually happened. While they're putting on this extravaganza last night, and some of this we do have to push back on, right? We can't just allow them to set their narrative without fighting back. But while that's going on, the inflation numbers came in, and the Nostradamus of Nashville over here was correct in that last night it's all, let's talk about the insurrection. But to the rest of America, who don't just leave MSNBC on in the background while they're drinking their soy milk, to the rest of America, the much bigger issue, by the way, that soy milk's getting a lot more expensive, is inflation. Which I thought, just because I was thinking, how much worse can it get for Biden, right? At some point, you feel like they must have hit something approximating political bottom. Nope. Gave him too much credit. The inflation numbers announced today, and we are at a 41-year high of 8.6%. Groceries up 12%. Gasoline up 49%. Airline travel, by the way, also up over 40%. So many things that really hurt. The one that people, I think, more than anything, Clay, are going to recognize, a 12% jump in the overall price of groceries, 8.6% overall inflation, and gas at an basically $5 a gallon national average right now, give or take. This is just economically, politically untenable for this regime.
Yeah, and look, I mean, putting it into context, you just turned 40, right, this past year. In your entire life, inflation has never been this high before. I mean, just to kind of put into context for everybody out there listening right now, December of 1981, I was a year old or so, year and a half old. Maybe I was 2. I guess I was 2. I obviously don't remember it. Now, there's a lot of people out there like, oh, my goodness, we're listening to 2. If you're in your 70s, you're listening to us and you think we're whippersnappers, right? But there's also people in their 20s and 30s listening. For a large majority of Americans, right? The average American today has not been alive for inflation at this level, which is pretty wild to think about, Buck. And what I said yesterday, and I put out tweets about it, you can follow at Buck Sexton, you can follow at Clay Travis. We're fighting the battles on social media fronts that we fight on radio as well. I said, this feels so tone deaf to me. Whoever scheduled this primetime hearing, I said, what's going to happen is everybody's going to react. Everybody's going to be talking about it. Early morning articles are going to be reacting to January 6th. And then early on this morning, we're going to get an inflation update, and it's going to be at a 40-year high, and it's going to completely take over all discussion and drown out any discussion about January 6th. Now, we'll still talk about January 6th, but I pulled this, Buck, because I want to mention it. I think it's significant. Everybody out there listening to us right now, you just mentioned groceries up almost 12%. Here are some other ones for day-to-day living out there. Chicken, up almost 18%. Chicken. Restaurants, largest ever increase, up 9%. Fuel, we all know this, up 107%, the largest ever. Electricity, a lot of people are going to be using a lot of electricity because it's getting hot, up 12%, the largest in nearly 20 years. Rent up, airfare up, services all up massively, right? So it isn't just that, hey, well, this price is up, you can kind of avoid it. Whatever you are buying right now, you are paying potentially 40-year highs and potentially all-time highs. We're, like you just mentioned, Buck, at $5 basically a gallon of gas, which has never occurred before. Inflation adjusted, we're at nearly an all-time high associated with what gas costs. And how many people do you think are waking up this morning saying, boy, I'm really glad the Democrats decided to have a special primetime hearing about 18 months ago, the riot at the Capitol? Or do you think they're looking 5 months into the future and saying, what are you going to do to help my family with this massive default tax increase? And let me just say this, Buck. There are a lot of Republicans, lots of Republican staff, also a lot of Democrats who listen to us on this show. We got to draw a line in the sand and say all spending is done. We cannot allow the Biden administration to pass any new tax increase, any new revenue expenditure. We got to hold the ground now, and we got to hold the ground for the next 2 years of the Biden administration. Every Republican, I really mean this, as we roll into the midterms, should be holding up their right hand and swearing to the American public that they will not increase expenditures, which is going to make inflation worse, and that their number one priority is going to be ensuring that Joe Biden doesn't continue to destroy everybody's ability to make purchases and live with these continued increases overall.
They did the thing they always do in advance of this inflation announcement, too, which is the worse than expected. Right.
Yeah. And we keep saying, how the experts wrong every time.
We keep seeing that somehow what is expected is always wrong, but what was predicted, right? What is expected by, quote, the economists around Biden is wrong. What was predicted by Donald Trump himself, by the way, people like you and me saying, hey, we're spending too much money. They can't do this stay at home, print trillions more thing. It's going to have real consequences. You can't reduce productivity and increase the amount of money in circulation without there being these negative effects. All of this was predicted. It's all coming true. And the only people that seem surprised by this are the Democrats calling the shots like Joe Biden, or maybe the advisors around him, and the so-called economists that are making these predictions too. Even Janet Yellen had to admit that transitory was a bad word for her to use and was obviously not correct. So there's no way they turn this around. No one thinks that they're going to turn this around. But actually, this is where I hate to be that guy, but I'm going to be that guy. It's going to get worse because now everyone realizes where we are, what's happening. The reality of what we're facing, I think, has become too obvious. So a recession is going to be a word that you start to hear. And, for example, I mean, here's Larry Kudlow over at Fox Business saying the Fed should raise interest rates a full point now, and that means recession is going to come along with it too. Play clip 3.
With 8.6% inflation, I don't see how the Fed can avoid significant rate increases in the immediate future. What do you say?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you're dead right. So, Stu, baked in the cake here is 50-50-50 in September, and probably they're going to have to do more in November, December. But you know what? They ought to try to knock down inflation expectations and raise it by 1 full percentage point, and probably do that a second time in July. Because look at
that's
these
what
numbers.
Paul Volcker did. Paul Volcker did. You know this.
Yes.
I knew you in those days.
Yes.
Volcker put the discount rate up 1%, and we had a huge recession.
Well, you know, it's going to be very hard to get out of this. I frankly don't think you can avoid recession.
We've been saying recession. I'm not an economist, Clay. Neither are you. We know a lot of stuff about a lot of things, but we've been saying recession since January, basically. And Kudlow is a very smart guy, as we all know, understands this world very well. This is what we're heading toward. I mean, and the funny thing will be what, not funny, haha, but, you know, it'll be odd to watch and listen to the Biden administration try to explain recession is just a natural part of life, folks. This is just, you know, this is the responsible thing for us to be handling right now. The Biden recession is actually evidence of how smart the people in charge really are.
So for people out there who are like, hey, what is the technical definition of of a recession? It's 2 straight quarters of declining GDP growth. We already have posted minus 1.5% growth in the first quarter. And it feels to me, Buck, like we are already squarely into the second quarter right now. And those numbers are likely to be down again. That is April, May, and June. When these numbers exactly will come out, we don't know. But, Buck, it feels to me like we're already in a recession, right? And the challenge that we're going to have is, let's use housing prices, for example, as a rough approximation here right now. When you decide that you're going to drastically increase the overall investment rates, you know, the interest rates, you're taking a lot of air out of a lot. And if you see right now what's going on in the housing market, we basically just popped the bubble. Nobody's going out and getting mortgages. The amount of transitions that are going on in terms of the housing market, I think, are going to drastically decline in terms of number of people who are buying. A lot of people, we'll talk about this in a sec, are maybe not going to move because they've got a 2 or 3% interest rate, 15 or 30 year. And they say, man, I don't want to move because now I'm going to have to pay 5.5 or 6% on that interest. It's a big issue. And everything is falling apart. Let's be honest.
This really matters to people.
Yes.
What Mark Meadows texted Trump 18 months ago about, hey, sir, what that just doesn't matter to people, despite Democrats trying so desperately to make it so.
Inflation 40-year high, January 6th. I mean, it really, the scheduling, it feels like the Democrats are trying to tank for the number 1 draft pick for those of you who are sports fans, because I don't know how they couldn't look at the calendar and say, hey, we want to take over the calendar. And then the next morning, the story is almost all gone. But I do think, Buck, in terms of what's going on, you watched the whole thing. I watched the first 20 minutes, enough to be able to tell what is the focus. It's all Trump, right? The goal is to make it so Donald Trump is toxic. It is, to me, it felt like a reboot that wasn't particularly successful, like a sequel that is nowhere near as good as the first one. Democrats really don't have any ideas. They're just anti-Trump by and large in the grand scheme of things. That was Biden's entire campaign, effectively, was I'm not Trump. And it seems like they're desperately trying to keep Trump from running in 2024. First of all, I don't think it's going to be successful because I think the Trump people, you and I both voted for Trump, are more likely to like Trump when he's getting attacked like this. But if they were successful, I could see this wildly benefiting Republicans like a Ron DeSantis who might decide to run. In other words, if they go after Trump, the other Republican who ended up winning the nomination would be even more likely to win in 24, right? If you like, as I try to like play this out chess-wise.
I try to think that there's no way that they're going to make our life as in opposition to the Biden regime this easy. But then I recognize that really the baseline fundamental reality of Joe Biden's election was that they ran a not Trump election. And that's
it.
really all they know how to do. The other stuff about unity, and you see this. Somehow Biden mutters the same speech. Doesn't matter where he is or what it is. It's always, folks, middle out and at the table, and they got the sleeves rolled up, and, I'm just one of you, and Scranton Joe on the choo-choo. And it's just blather, man. Like, no one wants to hear this crap anymore.
True.